Hello there, I'm Michael Steinman from Jazz Lives, and I have the rare privilege of sitting on a New York sidewalk right in front of the Ear Inn on a Sunday afternoon with my friend and very respected jazz scholar Mike ZIRPOLO, who's written a beautiful book on Bunny Berigan called Mr. Trumpet. And we are here meeting for the first time, and I decided to haul Mike out into the sidewalk and interrogate him about our favorite subject. You're all right with this, Mike?
So far, so good.
Okay,
great.
Good. He's a lawyer, so he knows when to have his Miranda rights read to him.
But I don't know when to shut up, so you can tell me when to shut up.
I'm not worried about you. Now, you told me once that your interest in Bunny Berigan comes from your family, from your household, from a precious artifact that you found in that house.
Yes, that's right.
Tell us.
Well, it was a 12-inch recording, a 78, and at the time I was a kid, which was back in the 50s, I really wasn't aware of the existence of 12-inch 78s, because most of them were 10-inch 78s. So when you would stumble across a 12-inch 78, you would say, oh my God, this is special. What is this? So I saw this in my father's record collection, but he absolutely forbade me from touching any of those records. So I didn't, and I just left it alone. And then one day, when I was about 10 years old, I heard the room where this was in the second floor of our house. I heard this wonderful music wafting down the steps, and I went gingerly up the steps and watched him, and he was sitting with his head in his hands listening, seriously listening to a record. And when I got closer to him, I saw that the record he was listening to was that 12-inch record. And when he was finished with it, he took this tone arm off the record, set it down, and turned to me, and there were tears running down his cheeks. This was very disconcerting to me as a 10-year-old, because I'd never seen my father shed tears. That was the first, last, and only time in his life I ever saw him shed tears. And I asked him, Dad, why are you crying? And he said, because I'm wondering why that guy killed himself with booze. And I said, what guy? And he said, Bunny Berigan, the guy that made that record. And it was like, I can't get started. So that was my introduction to Bunny Berigan and to jazz and to record collecting, and it sort of mushroomed from there.
Would you say in some way that maybe your whole impetus to write the book, to collect Berigan records, to be a scholar of his life, comes from trying to find an answer to that question?
Of what?
Why did that guy kill himself with booze?
Well, yes, of course. At the beginning, I was a child. I didn't know the implications of all of this. And as I grew and began to accumulate bits and pieces of information about Bunny's life, it began to be at times more confusing than elucidating of when this information was being gathered. So years passed, and a number of things happened that really put me on the track to either doing this or it was never going to be done by anyone. So I did it. And the result is the book. And the book, I guess, answers some questions, but there will always be unanswered questions. I was just speaking with someone yesterday about Bunny who was asking me questions that there were no answers to, at least answers that I don't have.
How do you think you got from being the person who listened to Berigan's music, who admired him, who collected ephemera about him, to the fellow who actually sat down and wrote a book of maybe 600 pages? Because that's a leap that few people make.
Well, the answer to that question is that let's see, this is 2013, about 6 years ago, I was in Chicago at a convention, at an IAJRC convention, and I walked into the hotel lobby where the convention was being held, and I saw a very tall man walking around, very stately looking man, very dignified looking man in a t-shirt with Bunny Berigan's picture on it. And I thought, that's odd. So I went up to him and I said, why are you walking around with a t-shirt with Bunny Berigan's picture on it? And he said, because my name is Perry Huntoon, and I have now in my possession the white materials, which is like the holy grail of anybody who knows anything about Bunny Berigan. And there's a whole big story about the white materials. And so I got to know Perry, and I said to him before I left that convention 3 days later, I said, Perry, will you do me a favor and email me a couple chapters from the white material so I can maybe write an article about Bunny Berigan for the IHARC Journal? He said, sure. So about 2 weeks later, in pieces, he sent me the entirety of the white materials, 1,500 pages. And I began writing an article. This was in October of 2007. And by April of 2008, I had 550 pages written.
Now, for those of you who don't know, the white materials came from a man named whose nickname was Bozy.
Right, Cedric
B-O-Z-Y.
Kingsley White, also known as Bozy.
Tell me that first name again.
C-E-D-R-I-C. Cedric or Cedric.
Yeah. Okay, that would give you reason to have a nickname. And he was the Berigan scholar and the collector before he met a very sad end.
That's right. And everybody assumed when Bozy died that the white materials were simply unfinished, unedited, scattered in shreds in his home in Oakland, California, and we assumed that's the end of that. So when I heard from Perry that he had them, and I said, are they digitized? And he said, yes, they are digitized. I said, you've got to send some of these to me, at least to start this. And he very generously did, and that was how this process, I mean, it was like opening the floodgates of a dam. Boom, out came what I had been accumulating mentally for the previous 50 years in 6 months.
But in some way, once you got the white materials, your book is so much more than a transcription of what Bozy White had done.
That's correct.
So you were doing your own research as well.
I was collecting things mentally, physically, and in every way you can imagine for over 50 years. And the two things coming together resulted in just one of those things where the stars were lined up. And again, I said to myself, either this is going to be done now by me or it's not going to be done ever by anybody. So I did it.
Because I gather from reading the book that you got to talk to other people who worked with Bunny, who knew him, and so on and so forth.
I did do some of that, but by the time I wrote the book, most of these people, if they were still living, were either in their very late 80s or in their 90s.
That's always the problem trying to do history when the first-hand participants are dead, when the children of the first-hand participants are dead. This stuff recedes farther and farther into the distance. So.
But I am happy to say that I have met a number of children of musicians who worked with Bunny. I never met either of his daughters. His younger daughter died 2 years ago, and I never had a chance to meet her. Of course, she was only 6 years old when Bunny died. So, but these people who are our age now, the children of these musicians, invariably have an almost reverential feeling for Bunny Berigan, not only because he was a great musician, but because he was a kindly guy and treated the musicians who worked with him very well. And as a result, they performed very well for him, sometimes under rather adverse circumstances.
I mean, it's funny because the standard mythological picture of Bunny, I think, by people who don't quite know, is this young man who's brilliantly talented, who falls in love with alcohol and jazz early on in his career, and the two of them are in a race in some way. And the odd sense of humor of the cosmos that he picks a pop song called I Can't Get Started, and he doesn't live very long, but he creates this beautiful blazing trajectory in his short life.
Yeah, they were always
Do you feel that way about him?
That is, I would say, the conventional wisdom, and there's certainly some validity to that, Michael. But the overarching tragedy of Bunny's life was not that he was an alcoholic, and not that it intruded on his career, which it did. But the overarching tragedy of his life is that he had the incredible bad luck to be an alcoholic with another disease called cirrhosis of the liver, which rarely, I mean in my studies, takes somebody out at the age of 33. I mean, you know, I don't have to tell you that many of the classic jazz musicians from the golden age of jazz were alcoholics who lived fairly long lives, into their 50s and 60s, some into their 70s, indeed some into their 90s. I was talking with someone yesterday about Sonny Greer, who lived to be 87 years old, who smoked 3 packs of unfiltered Camels a day or Luckies a day and drank at least 2/5 of booze a day and lived to be 87 years old. Bunny wasn't that lucky. He died at age 33. So he had some bad luck.
You said before the idea of Bunny's life being a tragedy. This is an idea that I confess I hold also, because we all want our heroes to live and live and live and live. And Bunny dies in 1942, and you think, couldn't he have lived another 10 years, another 20 years, another 30 years? While you were writing the book, you were obviously drawn to him as a character, drawn to him as a musician. Did you come to feel that you admired him more or less as you were writing it?
More, because the more I knew about him and the more I knew about his music. Indeed, very recently, as you know, we've issued a CD of many previously unissued performances. I am constantly amazed by the enormity of his talent as an improvising musician. This guy had a mind musically that comes along very rarely. He thought his improvisations, if you listen to them, are almost compositional. And you and I have heard a lot of jazz where people are improvising, but it doesn't have that flow, that line, that beginning, middle, and end, which so very often Bunny solos do. And that doesn't happen too often. And when you can improvise in a way that gives you that form and that line and that content, along with this explosive excitement, it's truly a remarkable thing. And he had that. And that's the triumph, of course, of his life, that he was around long enough to give us enough of a glimpse of that so that we now, 75 years after his death, are still able to enjoy that.
And my feeling is, and this is an unashamed plug, that those of us who love Bunny Berigan's music would find much to learn about him in Mike ZIRPOLO's book, Mr. Trumpet, and also, as I've just written recently on the blog, would find much to make us feel very happy in that CD called Swingin' and Jumpin'.
Yes.
So,
one thing that will, I think, happen to anyone who listens to that CD is they will listen to it and many emotions will come over them, which is very normal with any Berigan audience. He affected people that way. But the one thing that absolutely will happen is that they will smile when they listen to that music.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for taking us into the world of Bunny Berigan, who, contrary to expectations, could and did get started over and over and over again.
Indeed. Thank you, Michael. My pleasure.